Today on Unity Motorsports Garage, we're going to be diving into the secrets of the Ford 427 SOHC CAMMER. We're going to be taking a look at this engine and how it changed in drag racing, but how it became one of the most revered engines of all time. After Mopar cleaned house at the 1964 Daytona 500 with the new 426 Hemi, Ford knew that they needed to do something and do something fast. They created what has been called the 90-day wonder. They took an existing 427 FE and converted it to an overhead cam conversion. The initial cylinder heads had the spark plug location in the bottom side of the head. Through extensive dyno testing, it was found that the spark plug location really did not matter as far as peak performance. So Ford made the decision to move the spark plugs to the top side for easier maintenance and accessibility. By the time the Ford engineers got this engine sorted out and ready to hit the super speedways of NASCAR, the party was going to be over. Bill France of NASCAR put a ban on these overhead cam type engines, leaving this engine with nowhere to go other than be raced in drag racing. Ford offered this engine in two different versions, a 4-barrel version rated at 616 horsepower and an 8-barrel version rated at 657 horsepower. It has been said that 1,500 or so of these engines were offered over the counter at Ford dealerships, but no one really knows the exact production numbers of this engine. While the CAMMER didn't have a place to race in NASCAR, that didn't stop Ford. Ford shifted its focus for this engine onto drag racing. They contacted some of the top names of the sport, Connie Kalitta, Don Perdome, Sneaky Pete Robinson, just to name a few. So let's go back and watch some of this vintage footage.
Fuel dragster class, Sneaky Pete Robinson, the Georgia Tech engineer, has returned with driver Steve Carboni to try for his second consecutive World Finals championship. Representing Southern California is Don Perdome, a lanky young man who has won most of the nation's big drag meets, but is still looking for his first Tulsa victory. Detroit's Connie Kalitta is here with his long-nosed Bounty Hunter, a car that's won the prestigious Winter Nationals Championship. Pete Robinson, the defending World Finals champion, is a top-ranked star with heavy factory support. Like Don Perdome and several other big names at Tulsa, Robinson's car, called the Tinker Toy, is powered by an exotic overhead cam Ford engine, nicknamed a CAMMER by the racing crowd.
It didn't take these savvy drag racers long to realize that they had a diamond in the rough, but the engine had some issues that they had to work at, and so you will see in the upcoming film the frustration that Connie Kalitta had with the new engine right out of the gate.
Another driver who's having trouble at this point is three-time Winter Nationals champion Connie Kalitta and his Bounty Hunter. He hasn't been able to record competitive qualifying times, and he's far from pleased about his performance.
Well, the car didn't seem to work too good out there. We've got to do a little changing, it looks like. The conditions are quite a bit different here, and looks like it's going to be just a little bit harder to get the cars DT.
What kind of times did you run this morning?
Oh, we run 750. I run 210, but it just couldn't get a hold of anything on the racetrack. They made a change here. They've scraped the racetrack, and there's a lot of loose pebbles that are being pulled up to the surface now, and it's really giving us a lot of problems.
Is on his way to the line, and what kind of a rough situation does he face as qualifying draws to a close?
Well, we've only got about an hour and a half left, Brock. The track is now as good as it's going to get today. Connie is running in the 750s. 750s are not going to make the program. He'll probably not get another run today. This is it. He's going to have to make it now, or he's not going to make it. So here he comes. You can hear his engine coming up now, so let's see what it's going to be.
Right.
Very carefully staging. This is an all-important run. Lots of smoke. Awful lot of smoke. 7:55. Kalitta probably will not make the program.
The first major problem that drag racers had to overcome was the bottom ends of these engines would not live. It was one engine in right after another. So drag racers, being ever creative, figured out a way to adapt Chrysler's 426 Hemi bearings to the 427 FE block. Once they did this, the bottom end problems had been alleviated. The second major problem that drag racers encountered with this engine was the fact that this engine had nearly a 7-foot long timing chain, and that caused timing differences between the driver's side cam and the passenger side cam. It wasn't uncommon for drag racers to run normally up to 8 degrees difference of advance between the two cams to try to compensate for the chain stretch and the chain deflection. The always innovative Sneaky Pete Robinson, using his engineering background, set out to figure out a way to eliminate this timing chain issue on the CAMMER. Working with Harvey Crane of Crane Cams, they developed this gear drive system. And you will notice that this gear drive system has an extra idler pulley, or idler gear rather, and what that is so that they could actually use two right-hand cams. You see, since both cams turned in the same direction, you had to use two different cam cores. By running this idler, it made it easy for a crane to grind camshafts for the CAMMER itself. Unfortunately, Sneaky Pete Robinson lost his life at the 1971 Winter Nationals due to a front tire failure. With this, drag racing had a great loss. Sneaky Pete Robinson was one of the CAMMER's biggest advocates, and the car would be buried forever. During the mid to late 1960s, the CAMMER really came into its own at the very beginning of the funny car craze. Guys like Don Nicholson, Fast Eddie Sharpman, and Mickey Thompson really came onto the scene with the CAMMER and had huge success. Even a guy by the name of Ohio George Montgomery won the U.S. Nationals in both a Willys gasser and then later a Mustang gasser, using Ford CAMMER as power. We're going to take a look back at the great Mickey Thompson in the 1969 year he had with Danny Ongais driving, and just show how dominant this car actually was.
During 1969, the quickest funny car in the business is driven by Danny Ongais. His Mustang is built and maintained by the legendary Mickey Thompson. The heart of this torpedo is a Ford 427 cubic inch single overhead cam V8. Supercharged and burning nitromethane fuel, the engine develops 1,500 horsepower. Ongais' funny car record is 6.96 seconds and 207 miles an hour for the quarter mile.
It's been an unreal season for us. We've won over 90% of the races that we've participated in and won out of the 12 national events that we were very interested in. We've won 11 of the 12 so far. Well, I think it takes three main things. It takes a very good piece of equipment. When I say equipment, that's the chassis, engine, mechanical features. It takes an excellent mechanic, and it takes a good driver.
By late afternoon, drag racing's process of elimination has weeded out all but Ongais and Leonard Hughes. 1/100th of a second separates their best times. Now they will face each other for the funny car title.
You figure that the normal reaction time for a person is about 1/1500th of a second. It takes about another 1/10 of a second to get the tires all wound up and the drive shaft all wound up and everything. So you're working with 2500ths of a second. And if you can split the difference between a light going on and off, it takes a half a second for the light to go on and off, and it takes you 2500ths of a second to get moving. It's all something that's laid out before you, and you leave when the light's halfway off. I don't think there's anything magic, but it's really anticipation. Time comes to lead. You lead.
When the time came for Danny Ungaius to leave, he left. And he left in time to take the AHRA Spring Nationals funny car title with him.
I made a prediction one time that a drag racing car would run 150 miles an hour in a quarter of a mile. Some of the famous magazine writers at that time poked fun at me. And I actually believe that we will see someday a 5-second quarter of a mile run in over 300 miles an hour.
By the 1970 and 71 season, the writing was going to be on the wall for the CAMMER in top fuel and funny car competition. This is due to the ever-increasing power levels by these engines. Going from 1500 horsepower and up showed the ultimate weakness of the CAMMER, and that was the engine block itself. The factory Ford FE block could not handle this type of power, and being that this engine was never installed into a passenger car meant that there was no aftermarket support for this engine really. You have to remember there was only about 1,500 of these engines made, and so there was no need to produce an aftermarket block. If an aftermarket block had been produced, Connie Kalitta himself said that the history of Top Fuel could have been different. In 1970, the CAMMER would get a new lease on life, with NHRA forming Pro Stock class and AHRA forming Heads Up Super Stock. This meant that racers were going to be able to run these engines in full body production based cars, but it came with limitations. With the engine being at such a limited manufacture rate, that meant aftermarket support once again was going to play a part in this. But let's go back and watch Hubert Platt describe the CAMMER as he gets ready for Pro Stock competition.
Pro Stock is a 4-speed with a 427 SOHC engine in it, which is capable on the dyno at 690 horsepower. The Pro Stock car will run 135 to 140 mile an hour, in the low 10s and the high 9s. Now, this car has to be equipped with roll bars because it runs that fast. You have to have an engine strap in case you were to blow off fly wheels. I'm going to tell you, be sure and buy you a good helmet, not one of the cheap ones. I'm going to tell you, be sure and roll your fender wells. You didn't roll your wheel wells, what happened? The tires wobbled because we used the low profile tires. You cut a tire. If the old man upstairs with you, you're here. If not, you're gone.
The CAMMER, being behind the 8-ball of the 426 Hemi, would find success in these newly formed classes, but by 1971 the writing was going to be on the wall. So let's go back and watch the final NHRA win for a CAMMER by Dyno Don Nicholson at the 1971 Summer Nationals. Dyno Don Nicholson's win at the 1971 Summer Nationals was going to mark an end to the CAMMER's run in the NHRA AHRA competition. This was the end of an era for an engine that was truly great in its own right. Today, the CAMMER lives in the minds and hearts of enthusiasts all across the world, as this engine was truly remarkable development for its time period. It paved the way for modern engines such as the Ford 4.6 and the Ford 6.2 liter single overhead cam engines. Today you can build a single overhead CAMMER complete with aftermarket parts from ground up. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned a little bit about this. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe if you like what I'm doing with the channel. Until next time, this is Andy from Unity Motorsports Garage. I'll catch you later.